Very good evening to all of you. On behalf of Committee of Members in Practice of Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, I welcome you all in today's VCM on key audit challenges in financial instruments and various case studies in GST. In order to tackle these two important topics, GST as well as the financial instrument part, we are having two eminent personalities, two eminent speakers with us, C. Amit Kumar Jain ji and C. Advocate Shri J.K. Mittal ji with us. So we are going to tackle these two important topics, financial instruments as well as various intricacies, and on the basis of the case studies by Shri J.K. Mittal ji. We are having with us the C. Shashi Bhushan ji, Honorable Vice Chairman of Jalandhar branch. So I am thankful to the Jalandhar branch for hosting this mega VCM organized by CMP of ICAI. Thank you so much, Shashi ji. So I request C. Shashi Bhushan ji to please start the proceedings of this VCM. Over to Vice Chairman C. Shashi Bhushan ji.
Thank you so much. Today we are here to discuss key audit challenges in financial instruments and case studies in GST. These programs update our knowledge so that we can provide better services to stakeholders, which will ensure our growth and also safeguard our interests. So first of all, I will like to introduce one of the speaker, CA Amit Kumar Jain ji. CA Amit Kumar Jain is our co-speaker today, and I am delighted to introduce him. He is chartered accountant. He has taken courses and studies of GAAP conversion, IFRS, Ind AS, IPO advisory. CA Amit Jain sir leads a portfolio of large Indian business houses and multinational companies. He is having extensive experience in accounting and auditing across different industries. He has significant technical knowledge and practical experience on the application of Ind AS, IFRS, and US GAAP. C. Amit Jain sir has led and successfully delivered various Ind AS and IFRS conversion projects. He is responsible for marketing initiatives, which includes developing, following up new leads, present proposal to prospective clients, and successfully converting them to engagement. He is providing IFRS and Ind AS training to corporate and to the students in IFRS diploma. He is visiting faculty in ICAI and other platforms and regularly guiding members about various topics. And today we have the honor and privilege of being guided by someone with such wonderful experience and captivity personality. The honor of introducing such a great personality mentor is special to me. Thank you so much for that. And also present with us is CA Sonia Arora ji,
Chairperson of Shashi Bhushan ji. Thank you, Shashi Bhushan ji. Thank you, Anil ji, just providing me this opportunity to provide my thoughts on the financial instrument for the benefit of the society and the members. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. And now I request Chairperson of Jalandhar branch of NIRC of ICAI to say a few words and also introduce our speakers, CA J.K. Mittal.
Firstly, I extend my gratitude toward the CMP committee for this wonderful webinar on key audit challenges in financial statements and case studies in GST. So today it's really a moment of privilege for me to welcome CA Ajay Kumar Jain sir and CA J.K. Mittal sir. So introduction of J.K. Ajay Kumar Jain sir have already been in detail given by Shashi Bhushan sir. So for J.K. Mittal sir, actually he need not need any introduction, a man of passion, intellectual knowledge, and an eminent speaker. So J.K. Mittal sir, the chartered accountant turned advocate, law graduate from the Delhi University, and a practicing advocate, particularly in indirect taxes in High Court and Supreme Court. Actually, sir, you are an exemplary inspiration for all of us. He is also a co-chairman of the National Council on Indirect Taxes, ASSOCHAM. The Supreme Court Bar Association has honored Mittal sir for 9 consecutive years from 2006 to 2014, and also in the year 2016 to 2018 on the occasion of Law Day and Constitution Day. So, sir, I think on 26th of November, that is the Law Day, it will be a very honor for the Jalandhar branch to and another feather in the cap of Middle sir is also authored several books like Law, Practice and Procedure of Service Tax, Introduction to the GST, and Handbook of Equalization Levy, and Handbook of GST Law. So today we got blessed to have opportunity to pair such a charismatic personality and have got the wisdom from you, sir. So requesting Middle sir to please start his celebration.
So your voice is not audible. You are not audible. You are on mute.
Can you hear me now?
Now it is fine.
Yes, sir.
Can I start?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir,
Welcome,
please.
On behalf of CMP of ICI and Jalandhar branch, I extend my heartiest welcome, sir. Welcome to you, sir.
Thank you so much, my dear friends, and thank you to the institute and to the Jalandhar branch for giving me this opportunity. I got late by a few minutes, and I'm sure we will make up, the time which we have lost. The topic is quite interesting, the GST case studies. My experience says all we need the practical experience. Theoretically, we are very sound. And if we will discuss some of the, the case, how a chartered accountant or a professional can turn around the case, we can have a better practical experience in the GST. Let me start with a couple of very recent cases I have dealt in the GST. One of the case I remember that has came, to me, one of my very old chartered accountant family friend, where a SSC premises was searched by the GST officers in 2019. And in 2021, just a couple of months before, once the case came to me, the certain facts of the case you please keep in mind so that you understand what was the point where we could have turned around that case. And I can give you the tips that where, we chartered accountants should focus on those areas. In this case, once the search was conducted, his entire goods was seized by the GST officers. And in the meantime, the chartered accountant was dealing with that case. He offered to the department that we want to have a piece and we want to pay the entire tax amount with interest as well as 15% penalty to close this case. But the department did not, proceed demanding tax. The department case was only to confiscate the goods. And the chartered accountant has done a good job by stating that he was dealing entire transaction in cash, but that is the only goods he had. His plea was that it is the total turnover of that person is below 40 lakhs. Therefore, he is not within the GST law. But the officer contention was that since it is a pan masala, pan prag, therefore the 40 lakhs limit would not be applicable. Limit would be 20 lakhs. And that's why, this case goes on. Ultimately, SOCO's notice came for confiscation and no reply was filed so far as confiscation is concerned. Reply was filed only that we want to pay the tax, etc. And the SOCO's notice was decided against the thing was that the goods still lying in the same, go down since 2019, and he is paying the rent. Now, once the case came to us, we thoroughly examined the entire facts, and where we would have focused it could have changed the entire scenario. Once we see the definition of the turnover in the GST law, it's very clear that turnover will exclude whatever taxes and cess are imposed under the GST. In this case was about 39 lakhs or so, and department themselves accepted that if this turnover is below 20 lakhs, he will not come under the GST law. Once we see the computation done by the department themselves, almost 20 lakhs amount is pertaining to the taxes and cess under the GST law. If you exclude that, his turnover comes his turnover comes below 20 lakhs. Therefore, what we have said before the court, that he is not liable to pay GST. Therefore, entire proceeding, whatever the department has conceded under the GST law, is incorrect, because if he is not an SSC, not liable to get a registration under GST law, neither any goods could have been seized. And so far as the department has never demanded any tax at all. But in the meantime, the court asked a very interesting query. And the court said, Mr. Mittal, do you think whatever the goods was seized, that was the only turnover? Once he is dealing in the cash, turnover may be much higher than maybe in many crores. Then there we put our case that now the case is not a beginning stage. Investigation has already been done. So-called notice has already been issued. Even the appeal has already been filed. Appeal has already been dismissed. Therefore, the department case has been settled. Department case is that his turnover is that much, which is inclusive of taxes. If you exclude the taxes under GST, his turnover comes below 20 lakhs. Therefore, entire proceeding, whatever has been done, is illegal under the law. And we have demanded in the prayer that whatever tax or whatever amount he has deposited, that should be refunded with interest, as well as he should be given compensation because the goods which was confiscated by the time has spoiled. And third, we are asking that his godown should be vacated immediately, so that he should get away with the rent burden also. And the court, was quite convinced, in these arguments, and issued the notice to the government. And the government is yet to file the reply. Case is coming up next month again. Therefore, the 2-3 points you pick up from this. First, we should be very thorough about the law. Thorough about the law doesn't get a case on your lap. At least that time you read the consent provisions, and that will give you the insight whether the department is wrong or right. The second thing is that you have to read the documents, the facts of the case very carefully. You can't just ignore the facts and go here and there. Thirdly, the department, whatever case department has made, you have to respond to that. In this case, instead of responding to that, the goods is not liable to be confiscated or not liable for any penalty. The chartered accountant was dealing in that case. He said, we are liable, we are ready to pay, not even the case of the department at all. Therefore, if ultimately case is decided that the turnover as per the GST law, which I am sure would be below 20 lakhs, then the entire proceeding will go. And in the future also, no tax could be demanded about that particular proceeding where the confiscation of the goods taken place. Therefore, you must take, this is a wonderful case. And the chartered accountant who has brought it to me, he said, after a couple of meetings with me, because he's my family friend and I had to take up, such kind of matter. He said, I really learned a lot from this case. So far that they were going on a different directions, which was not even the case of the department. And they did not read the law, and they did not, read the documents carefully. And he accepted his mistake, and he said, now you have given me a wonderful lesson for future cases. Then I jokingly said, you don't forget to give me the royalty for future cases because you have learned it from me. Therefore, you all chartered accountant, must appreciate these kind of cases in a different fashion. It is not a question of the fees, how much you get. It is not a question of that, how much tax is involved. It is what important is that a case where the so-called notice was already decided against the assessee, a appeal was already rejected. After that, if you feel the entire case can be turned around and you can seek an interest from the government and as well as compensation. If that assessee succeed in that case, which I am trying my best, then it would be a win-win situation for him. Whatever amount he has paid, he has to get that back, and as well the interest he will get for the last 2 years, which is much more than probably the whatever expenditure so far he would have incurred on the litigation. Now, the second case I want to deal, with of a chartered accountant only. In fact, his case was listed yesterday also in the Delhi High Court. What is the fact of this case? I'm just, giving about the case so that you really appreciate. Couple of line I may repeat it because as per my, whatever understanding of the law or standing in the profession I have, I chose, some of the best cases where, you can appreciate the facts and how you can change it, because it is the matter of a confidence what you have. Confidence will be more important while dealing with the case. In this case, a chartered accountant in Delhi, the GST department conducted a search in his house and they did not find anything, but they took away the three things. First thing, the mobile phone of the chartered accountant. The second thing is that the laptop of that chartered accountant. And third thing, in the entire family, which are living in the different floor, ground, first and second, the total cash about 1 crore 40 lakh was also taken away by the GST department. It is about 11 months before. And that time the chartered accountant has already communicated more than a dozen times to the department. And the department did not return the cash amount. However, the department has returned the mobile phone and the laptop of that chartered accountant. Now, what is to be learned and what is to be told in this case about this fact? The first thing is that if you read the law, Rule 139 and as well as the Section 67, subsection 2 onwards, read where the search power comes, and while conducting the search, they have the power to seize what item they can seize, under what circumstances seizure can be made, and what procedure has to be followed for the seizures. And if that is not followed, how to deal or to deal with such kind of cases. In this case, the facts which I gathered from a chartered accountant, that no seizure memo was made. That means mobile phone, a laptop and the cash, just, it was taken away by the department by mentioning in the Panchnama. Panchnama is not sufficient for these taken away these goods. Panchnama is only about the statement of certain facts. That means how the search was conducted. If a department want to take away anything from that premises, they are supposed to pass a seizure order. If they have not passed a seizure order, this is an illegality they are committing. And if they have committed the illegality, you have to deal the case accordingly. Second thing you must learn, if your mobile phone and laptop they took away without sealing it and without passing a seizure order, and tomorrow they insert, their own thing or their own materials in your mobile phone as well as in your laptop, then what would be your state of mind then? You will say, no, it is not my document. Therefore, you must ensure that it is properly sealed also, because the open things, if they take away, then it would be very difficult for you, to prove that it is not your things. And therefore, while seizing the goods, whether the seizure order is passed or not, seizure memo, they will give it to you in INS 02, which you have, you are entitled to get a copy, and entire things has to be sealed. Therefore, if these procedures are not being followed by the department, you must make sure that how the benefit to be taken. But I will advise, don't fight with the officer at all. Only thing is that if you know all these things are happening, then you can take the benefit at appropriate time about these things. Because if certain things has not been followed in the law prescribed manner, because the law says Supreme Court has settled the law. If the law prescribed the certain things to be done in a certain manner, then it has to be done in that manner only, not in any other manners. Therefore, what difficulty, the chartered accountants are facing, probably in the indirect tax law, which I gathered from the so many chartered accountants. Indirect tax law, the officers try to create a psycho fear in the mind of the professional as well as in the assessee. As a professional, I will advise you, you should not succumb to that kind of pressure, because like I am an advocate, chartered accountant turned advocate, I have to say whatever I have to say. It is not like that I have to obey what the department is saying. Therefore, you should not fear about what the department is saying. You can strongly say, I'm a professional, I have to represent my client. And whatever you feel correct, you are entitled to represent in that manner. Nobody can stop you. The second thing is that if we read the law carefully, the law itself will give you an indication. Like the another things it says in the search proceeding in the GST law, section 67, subsection 10. In case of a search, provision of CRPC, Code of Criminal Procedure will also, be applicable in those cases. And if you read the section 100 of CRPC, which was also not followed in this case of a chartered accountant, you have to have a two independent witness of a locality once a search has been carried out. And you will surprised to know that when the GST officer carrying out the search in 99 to 100% cases, what I have seen in my life, they carry their own witness, a planted, witness, which is not a witness at all. Either the GST department, their own driver, or some other officers, get his own man from his own village. Such kind of proceeding will not be tenable in the law, and ultimately you will get some benefit. How it will be, benefit to be taken and what point of time, it is a matter of experience. It is a matter of proceeding at what place has taken place, what is the proceeding is going on. That is also an important factor. Therefore, and the third, which was the most important, for which now we have filed the petition in Delhi High Court, when the chartered accountant approaches to my office for seeking the help. Let me clarify that the chartered accountant cases, we provide the pro bono service, and just to not to praise ourselves, just to tell to the professional friends, if they have their own case, they can approach to my office, and my office will provide them honoraries, services, so that they should not fall in trap of any, hanky-panky activity. The most important question was that the cash was taken away. Whether the GST officer has a right to take away the cash. First thing, it was not seized, no seizure order was passed, no seizure memo was prepared, nothing was done. That is, the proceeding was not done in that manner. Now the legal question arises whether the cash could be taken away. My answer would be it cannot be. If you read section 67, subsection 2, it says the seizure can be done either of a goods or of the documents or the records or any things. So far as goods is concerned, goods can be seized only when it is liable for confiscation. Therefore, in the order, seizure order, he has to pass an order that it is liable for confiscation. If it is not liable for confiscation, the goods can never be seized. Then, so far as the records and the things are concerned, law says it can be seized only and only when the officer form an opinion that these are secreted and he want to have these documents, records, or the things which are useful for the proceeding under the GST law. Therefore, he has to satisfy that it is useful for the proceeding under the GST law. Now the cash, so far as cash is concerned, now you appreciate, so far as cash is concerned, it is not a goods. If you read the definition of the goods, it has been specifically excluded. Money has been specifically excluded from the definition of the goods given under the GST law. Therefore, it is not a goods, and therefore it could not have been seized at all. It is not a records or a documents. Now the question arises whether it is a things or not. To my mind, it is not also a things. Even if somebody want to argue it is a things, then another condition law imposed under the GST law that the things can be seized when it is useful, for the proceeding pending under the GST law. How the money can be useful? Some document is there, it could be useful because it could be an evidence. They want to, investigate those documents. They want to confront other accused with those documents. But so far as cash is concerned, under the GST law, it can never be useful for proceedings because the cash is not an evidence. Cash is not like a CBI, catch red-handed a person who take a bribe and that cash become a case property which they have to produce before a court, and on the basis of that cash become an evidence that yes, he was taking a bribe. Only a person can be punished. But that is not a case here. Therefore, that is also important. So far in this case, the two hearings took place and the case took a very ugly, or you can say very different turn also. Because by the time in 11 months, the chartered accountant has given so many documents, so many, submissions, more than 12 times he has filed written submission. and giving a bifurcation of this cash. This was for mother, brother, bhabis, like this. And that's why the court said that this person cash we are ordering, returning, 20 lakhs or so against the bank guarantee, and the case we will decide. And so far the other cash was taken in the possession from the brother. Now you understand, if suppose a search is conducted in the assessee premises, assessee is living separately on a separate floor, and their other family member living separately on the separate floor, can a search be extended to the other family member? Answer is no. Can something could be taken away from the possession of the somebody else? Answer is no. That's why you read subsection 10 of section 67, which refer to the section provision of the CRPC and section 165 of CRPC. And section 165 CRPC make it very clear. Search can be conducted to search certain specific things. The person who is going to conduct a search, he should make up his mind what he want to search. He cannot have a search in journal. Whatever he want to take away, he want to take away. If something is secreted, that only can be taken in his possession. And that secreted things is useful for the GST proceeding. Now the GST department is saying before the court, in Delhi High Court, they said we have referred the matter to the income tax department. Income tax department is not taking any interest. That means they themselves are conceding. The case is not concerned with the GST at all. It may be concerned with the income tax department, but income tax department is not interested with such a petty case. For them, 1-2 crore rupees is not a big amount at all. This is the GST department. They feel happy once they harass assessee. Therefore, another point which is most important in this case, which you have to understand, because the case study means you have to read more facts and the more law, and that become a case study. Unless until you read it, it become like a movie. And if you hear me like you're going to a movie only, then you will not gain anything. As a chartered accountant, as a professional, our duty is to read time and again the law and the facts, and we can make out a very good case. Now, the another factor in this case is that the department in writing is saying they are investigating ABCD company. Now, ABCD company you are investigating, you are not investigating chartered accountant and his family. If the case, if it is at all made out, the tax will be demanded only from that particular assessee, that particular company only. If the company does not pay, you can't ask pay the tax to ask to a chartered accountant to pay the tax. If you read section 73 and 74 of the GST law, it's make very clear that they have to issue a so-called notice to a person chargeable with tax. Chartered accountant is not liable to pay the tax for his client or anybody else. And that chartered accountant was so innocent, he only took a registration. Thereafter, he did not deal with that client at all. How, to what extent, the officers are abusing their power if you come out with, such kind of cases. Therefore, you appreciate such cases with the certain facts and the law. You can turn around the case. If you will be so soft with the officers, those who are indulging in abuse of power, malpractices, taking bribe, and still you will not dealing with them in a firm hand, and as a chartered accountant, then you will lose your case and lose your confidence. Only yesterday, one video I have seen just about a minute. I want to narrate you. It was some kind of, the one speaker, motivational speaker was telling to somebody else. Generally, I don't hear such kind of speech, but it came in my knowledge by sitting in the flight. Why in the, in the jungle, we call the sher as a king. Do you feel the sher is the animal, the lion is the animal who is the biggest one? Answer is no. Or he is the heaviest one? Answer is no. Biggest one may be the giraffe. Heaviest one may be the elephant, but still who is the king of the jungle is the lions, because he feels he is the king. Therefore, once we deal with the department, the 2-3 tips I want to give you. Every time you must feel we are a chartered accountant and we are more educated than the officer who is dealing with us. Secondly, officer has his own limitations. He can't go away beyond the case. And thirdly, once he's dealing with the professional, he has to be more courteous. He is not dealing with the assessee. Therefore, he cannot blame to a chartered accountant indulging in any practice at all. And you must tell to the officers, mind your language, otherwise we will make a complaint against you. Then you will get a very fair result. He will understand that he is dealing with a professional. Like once the advocates are dealing with any police officer or in any court with any case, he is very firm in his view. Once he has studied the law, he say it very firmly and very confidently. That's why he succeed. Same is the position of a chartered accountant. Once you represent to your assessee, you have to be very firm. If you represent your client, you have to tell to the officer, these are the facts of the case, he must record it, and these are my legal submission, he must record it. Only thing you have to learn, which point of time you have to open your mouth. It is not like that you have to give your defense every time. Like, just give me an example. Suppose a police is catching someone. A advocate will not argue entire case before a policeman, because the police is not an authority who is going to decide the case. It is the judge who has to decide the case. Therefore, whatever minimal is required, he will disclose that. Otherwise, he will wait for the police to make out a case and then he will argue the case and he will win. Therefore, that is also one of the factors we have to keep in mind. Another case, I want to, discuss with you. When another chartered accountant whose premises was searched, I can remember, one of the NIRC webinar chairman specifically asked me to discuss that case. I'm not going to disclose the name and, certain things. That is not a material things here. But what important fact is that it will encourage you to deal with the GST officers as well as the GST cases. Because generally, once you hear, from the media or from the officer, you will find that every chartered accountant is culprit. But if you will hear from yourself or by reading, the facts of the case, examine it, you will find that the chartered accountant is not culprit. Culprit is the GST department. Their success rate is only 10% probably. 90% case they lose it. Therefore, you don't be afraid with dealing with the chartered accountant cases or with the GST officers. They have their own limitation. In this particular case, the chartered accountant mobile phone was illegally kept by the GST officers for 5 days. Despite begging, they refused to return. And that chartered accountant later on my advice, made a police complaint. Because otherwise it would have been a very ugly for a chartered accountant. After a few years, some investigation agency comes that your phone was misused while talking to a terrorist or maybe, talking to a certain politician for taking money, etc. Then you will not be able to defend yourself. If your phone was illegally kept by the officers, he might have misused by talking to his own girlfriend to certain other illegal purposes. How you will come to know? Therefore, you must make on record that your phone is illegally kept by the GST officers. If you will not put it on record, and as soon as you will put it, I am sure that officer life sooner or later would be in trouble because he is illegally acting. And that, don't take it is a small matter, it is a very serious matter. Once he made a complaint to the police, the GST officer was quite disturbed and they conducted the search in the house as well as in the office of that chartered accountant. And while the search was conducted, a summon was also, served upon him. These are the fact of the case. And one another fact is that they again took the mobile phone and laptop as well as so many other documents, diaries from that chartered accountant office. Now, again, no seizure memo was made. No seizure order was passed. The question arises, can they take away? Second question was that once a summon was issued on the day of the search, it carried a DIN number, which is the same DIN number which Joint Commissioner already used it while authorizing the search. Now the question arises, a summon which is carry the illegal DIN number, is it not a forced summon? Is it valid under the law? That is also very important factor. The third thing, whether the search which was conducted, whether that itself was legal or not. Because if you want to conduct a search in the chartered accountant premises, you must keep in mind the chartered accountant, if suppose the chartered accountants are being issued a summon, for what purpose? For whether you are involved in a crime or whether you are handling that client. If you are handling that client, you cannot be issued a summon by the GST officers, because section 129 of the Indian Evidence Act as well as clause 1 of the schedule 2 of the Chartered Accountant Act, which fully protect you. Because if you read the law more in details, you will find that a chartered accountant once come to know about the facts of anything, while during the engagement, his professional engagement as a chartered accountant dealing with an SSC matters, he is duty bound not to disclose any information about his client to anyone. If he disclose, it will be deemed to be a professional misconduct and his name may be removed from the membership register of the institute. Therefore, you have to take a legal defense. Don't feel like that the officer can call anyone and everybody. Secondly, even if you read the GST law section 70, it is not that any or every officer can issue a summon. It is only the proper officer can issue the summon, not each and every officer. Therefore, in most of the cases, the summons are being issued illegally. And I'm not going that far in this case. Therefore, the summon was issued, then second summon was issued, then third summon was issued, and then fourth summon was issued. That time, the chartered accountant sought my help. Before that, only discussion took place. And then once we wrote a reply to that, just in one page, no further summon has come. We said your summon is absolutely inconsistent with the entire proceeding. We also said you have no jurisdiction to issue a summon at all. You have no legal authority even to issue the summon, and the summon is totally vague. Now you understand more fact, because if you read the more law, the circular, probably the 128 issued by the Ministry of Finance, it says while giving, and that's was also amended, the circular later on, a month or after 2 months, maybe in December 2020. Once a summon is to be issued, the government of India has prescribed a specific form for while the summon is to be issued. And generally, once the summons are being issued, sometimes or most of the times, the officer illegally write in the summons that you will not leave the office of the department without their permission. That line is totally illegal, unconstitutional. He cannot keep someone in confinement. If he has called someone to record a statement, he should have recorded a statement, allow him to go. But he wants to create more pressure, writing some illegal things. Therefore, if you read the law circular, the case law, you will know that the GST officers many times illegally act in one way or the other way. That we should also, take it very seriously, and we have to respond accordingly. Another things, in that case also, in the summons, they mentioned that they are conducting an investigation against so and so company. If they are investigating a so and so company, then they have to state why they are calling me. If they will not state, that someone will be vague. Even in the criminal case, civil case, if we want to summon somebody, we file an application in the court. Is so and so person required to be summoned. The court, after reading the application, hearing our arguments, either reject it or either accept it. In fact, the section 70 itself says the proper officer can issue a summon to any person. Any person does not mean everyone. Where he consider necessary, that means he has to show his bona fide that he is required to be summoned. On what basis? He must have to have some materials. Therefore, in those cases, now the case is pending in the court. Let's see what would be the final outcome. But 2-3 things is very interesting happened in that case. the department commissioner has already filed his reply in the High Court by stating very, very important 2-3 things I want to narrate. First thing is that they said a summon is not required to be issued while recording a statement. If that contention is accepted, that the provision of the summon is not required in the law at all, because they made this statement because the chartered accountant statement was recorded without even issuance of the summons when his phone was confiscated illegally for 5 days. Without any basis, it was kept. Second thing they said, while we conducted a search, they admit they have taken away laptop, mobile phone, and various records. And they said before the court, we have not seized it. We have just taken away for examination. Law will not permit such kind of, the things are taken away. By the time they would have inserted so many material therein, how it could be done. Therefore, if they take away all these things, you have to be very careful whether you want to permit them in such a fashion they can take away. Now let's take up another case which only yesterday one of the chartered accountant was discussing with me about his client case in Kolkata, where again a search has already been conducted. After the search, there are certain allegations were made. They take away the assessee with them, kept in confinement almost for more than 24 hours. They asked them to sleep on the floor. They recorded statement forcefully on their own term. And they also asked to pay the GST, and the GST was also got deposited on the spot. Now the question, and along with that, I am also connected with another case which I filed in Gujarat High Court. A Bombay company was searched by the DG GST intelligence officer from Gujarat. A factory or the office was in Mumbai of that company, and that case also on the spot, certain amount was got deposited in the January 2021. Now, if the question arises, question may come in your mind, the officers comes, there is a lot of pressure, how we deal with. Very simply speaking, the officer create a pressure only because of 2 reasons. One reason is that you are highly indulging in the violation of the law. Therefore, if your client is indulging in such violation of the law, then he may be afraid of it. But you are a chartered accountant representing him. Why you are afraid? You are not. You have a right to represent your client. Second thing is that you may be under the pressure of your client when you have no knowledge of the law. If you have a knowledge of the law, that pressure will not work at all, because the law does not permit them. You take one example. When the Indira Gandhi was killed, her own son was the Prime Minister of the country. Whether that person who killed the Indira Gandhi could have been hanged very next day, answer is no, because there is a legal process one has to follow. Officer has no authority to decide everything on the spot. He has to follow whether there was a certain violation of the GST provision or not. It is a legal procedure has been prescribed. He has to follow. Therefore, the first question is that when the search is conducted on the spot, whether any direction could be given to deposit certain amount. My answer is that no, such a direction would be totally illegal under the law. No amount could be directed to be deposited on the spot. Cases are, filed and put up for final hearing before Gujarat High Court in such case. But before that, Delhi High Court in the VAT regime has already, decided such cases. They said there is no business for the central excise officers to, during the search itself, to take away the money either in post-dated check or maybe in cash for deposit in the name of the tax. That is totally illegal. In fact, Delhi High Court referred the matter to the Central Vigilance Commission. They said their conduct should be examined and certain directions should be issued. You read even the circular issued by the CBIC in February 2021. In that circular, the Ministry of Finance itself has conceded there, while the search are being conducted by the GST officers, no law is being followed in general, and many complaints have been received by the Central Board of Indirect Taxes and Custom as well as the Central Vigilance Commission. Therefore, that must give you a boost up. Who is illegal? Illegal is not the you or your client he is committing illegally, it is being committed by the GST officers. So such officers are only knows how to violate the law. If they want to comply with the law, they will come in a proper fashion. I will just take a call for a second. Kindly. Yes, I'm so sorry because I have the another physical conference in the Lucknow branch, and those people have already arrived at. But still, I will complete that. Therefore, you please appreciate the law in a proper perspective. Same section, if you read maybe 10 days for 10 times, you will get a lot of material within those provisions itself. Generally, the chartered accountant make a mistake because we are not discussing with them the practical case study, and that was my objective to discuss that. Secondly, whatever superintendent, inspector, commissioner, whatever say, it is their job to say. If you will so much influenced by their version, you will not be able to succeed in any cases. Therefore, don't listen too much to them. But their job is that you only see what is their success rate. 85% case the Central Excise Department has always lost in last 70 years. Therefore, their success rate is only 15%. Therefore, your chances of success is 85%, even without reading the law. And if you start reading the law and analyze the facts, your success rate may become 100%. Therefore, these are very important cases. They are committing illegality in the name of the search, while issuing summons, while interrogating. Now you go by that all such cases. The important factor in Mumbai case, which I filed in the Gujarat High Court, the company was in Mumbai. The important factor, once we analyze it, what we find it, that in the day of the search, there are 3 documents were made. One is a Panchanama, one is a seizure memo was made in that company, and one is summons was issued. But if you see the name of the officer wrote in all the 3 documents, but his the signature, the signature on those documents are different. You understand, a 6th January 2021, a search was conducted under GST law. Same officer, signed in the Panchanama. Same officer, make a seizure memo and signed it. Same officer issue a summons and signed it. But his signature is totally different. I am not saying a little different. One will feel like that it is a different person altogether. And not only his signature is different, his designation is also different. And not only designation is different, the stamp he has put is also different. Therefore, if the same officer is putting different stamp on the same day, different signature and different designation, what it would be called as like the Special 26 movie, whether these officers were genuine or they are fake. Therefore, every day you hear, there are fake cases, this chartered accountant involved. I reject all these allegations are totally baseless. In fact, I have taken up this, with the president of the institute also. And I have taken up, in certain way with the government of India also. You can't, malign the reputation. If they want to malign the reputation, or the chartered accountant should be confident, and our institute should face up a very brave face of a chartered accountant. And I can take a lead. Everywhere we should go, and we should draw the distinction between the corrupt officers and an honest chartered accountant. And we should show all those cases. Take out the printout from the Google. How many officers, GST officers have been, arrested by the CBI by taking bribe. And if you put up 10 cases every day on social media, the government will also afraid, because we should not allow to the government to advertise that the chartered accountants are corrupt, chartered accountant indulge in all this practice. I totally against it. And let me tell you, in Faridabad, the commissioner mala fidely issued a press release. If any chartered accountant or a citizen of country will read it, that will malign the reputation of entire chartered accountant fraternity. I am also chartered accountant. And that press release was totally fake, because I am dealing with that case. I am dealing with that case. The same commissioner who issued the press release now filed an affidavit in the High Court saying that this chartered accountant only took a registration of a company, and only mistake he has made, registration is address is not complete. First thing, that statement is also false, because the registration certificate carry the same address which is in the utility bill of that particular company. Therefore, press release that we have the crunching evidence, we have this evidence. In the court, they have no evidence. You know, the court is the only platform where the case is to be decided. The media is not a platform, the case to be decided against the chartered accountant or the Chartered Accountant Institute or the fraternity as a chartered accountant. Therefore, my humble submission is that if you have such cases, you should have a brave face. If you have personal grievances as a chartered accountant, you can contact anytime to my office. We will extend the full help, very honorary help. You have some query, I can take up the few queries, because my next physical conference will start at 5 o'clock. We may be late by a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. There is a one query. DGGI has conducted an investigation in Jaipur, but sent the notice to another company in Haryana. Can DGGI do this?
DGGI can do the send the notice anywhere. That is not a bar. But the question is the question should be little different. If we analyze the facts, whether in those facts, whether the notice could have been sent or not, because what the DGGI is doing, they start making roving inquiry. That is not in the domain of the DGGI. Roving inquiry means कि आपको सिर्फ ये एक केस मिला कि ये जो माउस है इसके बारे में इन्वेस्टिगेट करना है. अब आपको ये तो कुछ मिला नहीं, और वो उसके घर जाके या उसके सारे क्लाइंटों पे जाके सब कुछ इन्वेस्टिगेट करने लगते हैं. That permission is not under the law. Everyone has the specific job. Suppose मैंने एक offense commit किया, CBI को केस रेफर कर दिया, तो CBI can investigate that case. I might have committed 20 more offenses. That all offenses cannot be investigated by that officers. Anything else?
Thank you, sir. Hope you are having your another physical session at the same place. So rest of the questions I will send you through mail, and you may kindly revert on those. Well, I will send to the members, sir.
Thank you so much.
On behalf of CMP of ICAI Committee of Members in Practice, as well as Jalandhar branch of NIRC of ICAI, I extend my heartiest thanks, sir. Thank you very much for sparing your valuable time and wonderful deliberation, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you. We are having our another speaker, C. Amit Jain ji, with us. So we are having chairperson of Jalandhar branch of NIRC of ICAI. Earlier, the voice was not clear. Madam, if you permit, maybe start the second session of this today's DCM. Madam, can you hear me?
Village and all the Jalandhar. That's we got the opportunity to hear from you right now. And for the physical seminar too, I request you to pay visit. I think the query of GST is altogether difficult to you. So it has been over. So now section is for the Kumar sir, just reading through your profile. I've said, seeing you are having so much exposure in the IFRS index and other stream too. And nothing in the GST. Yes, sir, I think the IFRS index, these are your core. So, sir, the impact of IFRS, please hear in your deliberation today, how they are impacting in GST. If you can correlate in that. So, please enlighten us on that matter.
Hope voice is not there from the chairperson, madam. So may I request the another guest speaker, C. Amit Jain ji, to please start your deliberation. Over to Amit ji.
Sure. Thank you, Anil ji. Thank you, Sonia ma'am, and thank you, Shashi Bhushan ji. First of all, I would like to say that thank you so much for providing me this opportunity to speak at ICAI level to provide my thoughts for the benefits of the society and the members. And definitely in the first session, we have got lots of practical insights from J.K. Mittal sir from the GST aspects. That is really wonderful session, I would say. So I will, Anil ji, I will try to share my screen. Please let me know if this is visible.
Yes, it is fine, sir.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So hello everyone. So after the GST session, I'm going to present some thoughts, some key nuances in respect of the financial instrument from the auditor perspective, from the accountant perspective, from the company perspective, right? So we are going to discuss couple of agenda in respect of financial instrument. So first thing is, let me talk about the agenda, what we are going to have in next 1 hour session. First is financial instrument overview. We will talk about the different nuances. We will talk about the different instrument in respect of financial instrument which the company generally enters into. Then we will talk about the risk to which the entities may be exposed in respect of the financial instrument, right? Because after entering into the financial instrument, what are the different types of the risk which the company may be exposed? So we should be aware of that because as an auditor as well as an employee of the organization. Then we will talk about the key audit consideration while doing the audit of the financial instrument, right? So financial instrument is one of the area where the people where I have generally seen the people generally struggles, right? So we should be very clear that what are the key item, what are the key areas where we need to think of while doing the audit of the financial instrument, right? Again, while doing the internal financial control evaluation of those financial instruments, what are the key areas where we need to pinpoint, right? Then we will talk about certain case studies, right? Couple of case studies I have included in my presentation. In those case studies, we will talk about what is the transaction, how it is to be presented, how it is to be accounted, and then we will talk about in doing the accounting of those transactions by the management. As an auditor, what are the key pinpoint areas? What are the critical areas? What are the key areas where we need to think of while doing the audit? Correct. Then I will talk about key impact areas on the financial instrument on couple of matters which has impacted because of the COVID. And then finally, I will talk about financial review boards, financial FRRB boards, which have issued certain comments by reviewing the financial statements of the various companies. This FRRB comments is nothing but a different cell or a different committee of ICAI who reviews the financial statement of the companies and provide their comments that these are the certain errors or these are the certain challenges which they have identified which should not be there, right? So this is the broad agenda which I am having today in respect of the financial instrument, guys. Correct. So I will start my session, guys, in respect of the brief overview of the financial statement, right? Or the financial instrument. So as you guys knows, what is financial instrument? It starts from a contract, right? Contract, two or more parties and a monetary value, that is nothing but a financial instrument, guys, right? You must have seen in the various companies financial statement, company enters into the lots of financial instrument. So I have tried to summarize those financial instrument into this particular slide, right? So I've categorized those financial instruments into 4 categories. One is the financial asset instrument, second one is the financial liability instrument, third one is the hedging instrument, derivative instrument, and fourth one is the equity instrument. Let me open the pointer here as well so that I can pinpoint on the item which I'm talking about, right? So if I start with the financial instrument, financial asset instrument. So as an overview, what is financial asset? Very simple. Contractual right to receive cash or bank is a financial asset, right? Investment in shares is a financial asset. Cash is a financial asset. Bank balance, sorry, bank balance is a financial asset, guys, right? So I've categorized the financial asset into 3 different categories. One is the primary instrument, second one is the debt instrument, third one is the equity instrument, right? Primary instrument, for example, cash, trade receivable, security deposits, loans receivable, bank balance. In all these instruments, you will able to understand there are a certain common nature of items which is hidden into these items. For example, in all these items, I have a contractual right to receive, right? Whether cash, if I tender my cash, I have a right to receive something in place of that cash. Trade receivable, if I have a trade receivable, if I have a debtor sitting in my books of accounts, that means I have a contractual right to receive from my debtor. If I have given any security deposit, let's say I've given a security deposit of 1 lakh rupees for the period of 10 years to obtain the office premises. That security deposit is a receivable, that is a financial instrument because I have a contractual right to receive cash. Similarly, loans and receivable. If I've given a loan which is to be recoverable, it is a financial instrument again. And bank balance, bank has a liability to pay back to me whenever I want. That is a liability from the bank, and a receivable or a contractual receivable from the company perspective. So in all these items, there is a one common perspective is a contractual right to receive, right? So all these items, we should first identify that all these items, we should first know that all these items are nothing but a financial instrument. And how this needs to be accounted? This needs to be accounted as amortized cost under Ind AS 109, right? Let me also clarify you guys that in respect of financial instrument, we have three standard under Ind AS, we have three standard under IFRS. Those standards are Ind AS 109, Ind AS 32, and Ind AS 107. Ind AS 109 only provides the guidance in respect of the classification, in respect of the measurement, in respect of the recognition, in respect of the derecognition, in respect of the hedge accounting, in respect of the derivative accounting. Ind AS 32 deals with the presentation. What is presentation? Presentation in the financial statement. That means what is equity, what is liability in the financial statement. If you remember, guys, when we have adopted commerce way back in class 11th, right? We have understood what is asset, we have understood what is equity, we have understood what is liability. But here, after qualifying CA in the CA final course as well, we have a standard which provides the guidance what is equity, what is liability. Entire Ind AS 32 is dependent upon this factor, what is equity, what is liability, right? And then we have one more standard, Ind AS 107, which provides the guidance on the disclosure, right? So when we want to do the audit of any instrument, guys, we should have a good understanding on all these three standards, because it is not only about the accounting, it's more in respect of the disclosure, it's more in respect of the inputs to do the accounting of those financial instruments, right? So first is primary instrument. So we have talked about all these items, and these will be recognized at amortized cost. So as an auditor, we should know that all these items needs to be recognized at amortized cost. And there are a couple of conditions which are attached to the amortized cost. When those conditions get satisfied, only then I can recognize my financial instrument, which are these assets, can at the amortized cost level only, right? So those conditions are business model test to collect, and the second one is the SPPI test, right? So as an auditor, we guys should be aware of the fact that what is the business model test to collect and what is the SPPI test. Only then we can recognize my financial asset at amortized cost category, correct? Next one is the debt instrument. What is debt? Debt means loan, debt means debenture, debt means bond. But that does not mean that I have always taken a loan. It may also possible that I have given a loan. That means if suppose I have invested into the debentures of Reliance, I have invested into the debentures of Bharti Airtel. That is what? That is an asset. But that asset is in the nature of loan, right? So what is debt instrument? It is a financial asset, but I have made an investment in the debenture, I have made an investment in a bond, I have made an investment in a perpetual debt instrument. That means I have given a loan to these companies in the form of debenture, in the form of bonds, in the form of perpetual debt instrument. So those kind of instruments are also in the nature of financial instruments, right? And how those to be accounted? They will be accounted either at amortized cost or FVTOCI or FVTPL. Right? I hope you guys understand what is amortized cost. I hope you guys understand what is FVTOCI, and I also hope you guys understand what is FVTPL. Right? Now I will move forward and I will provide some sort of more insights on the equity instrument. What is equity instrument? Equity instrument is a very simple instrument. For example, I have invested in the equity shares of any company, any listed company, any unlisted company. For example, I have invested in the shares of Reliance. That is an investment. That is an asset. I need to disclose that investment as a asset item in my balance sheet, right? Investment in the preference shares, which is in the nature of equity, right? If you remember, guys, under Indian GAAP, whenever a company issues a preference share capital, we just recognize an accounting entry, bank account debit to preference share capital. But here, when we talk about IFRS, when we talk about Ind AS, it's not about share capital. It's more about the substance of the transaction, right? We just need to see whether this amount of equity is supposed to be refunded or not, whether there is any obligation on the company or not, right? Basis that we need to account for. That's why I mentioned that investment in preference share is an equity nature investment. In only in that sense we will say it is a financial asset, right? It is a financial instrument, it is an asset. But at what value that needs to be recognized? It may be recognized at cost, it may be recognized at FVTOCI, it may be recognized at FVTPL. Now as an auditor, now as an employee of the organization, now as a chartered accountant, right, we should have a very good understanding when a particular financial asset to be categorized, to be recognized at amortized cost, at FVTOCI, at FVTPL, right? Because couple of nuances, couple of challenges are there, couple of conditions are there to understand the amortized cost, to understand FVTOCI category, to understand FVTPL category, and all these categories needs to be evaluated in a joint manner, guys, right? I give you a more perspective, some sort of more insights into that. If I need to classify my financial asset at amortized cost, two conditions are there, right? What are those two conditions? One is business model test to collect, and the second one is the SPPI test, right? If I need to classify my financial asset at FVTOCI category, two conditions needs to be satisfied again. One is business model test to collect and sell, and the second one is the SPPI test. SPPI is common. If the SPPI test gets failed, then I do not have any other option. I have to classify my financial asset at FVTPL category. What is FVTPL? That means the asset needs to be fair valued on each reporting date, but the change in the fair valuation will be routed through P&L only, right? There is no condition attached in case of FVTPL category. It is a residual category, right? If there is a derivative, that needs to be recognized at FVTPL category only. So in this scenario, guys, in the financial asset category, I have divided all the instrument into three categories. One is the primary instrument, one is the debt instrument, and the second one is the equity instrument. Depending upon the nature, depending upon the transaction, depending upon the substance of the transaction, as an auditor, as a chartered accountant, we need to do the accounting, or we need to check whether the accounting done by the management is correct or not, right? And believe me, guys, in respect of all these items, these amortized costs, FVTOCI, FVTPL, all these items needs to be disclosed in the financial statement, right, with the appropriate disclosure as well. In every schedule, I need to mention that, boss, whether if it is a financial asset, whether I am recognizing it at amortized cost, whether I am recognizing it FVTOCI category, or whether I am recognizing it FVTPL category. And basis that, my disclosure will follow, right? So it is more important that we understand the different nuances of these three different accounting standards. Okay, guys, let me move forward. And then the next category is financial liability instrument. What is financial liability? We all know contractual obligation to pay cash or bank is a financial liability, right? Again, I have divided into financial liability into three different types of instrument. One is primary instrument, second one is the compound financial instrument, third one is the puttable financial instrument, and guarantee contracts, right? What is primary instrument? The basic nature of instrument, for example, trade payable, for example, borrowings, for example, other borrowings. That means borrowing taken from a company, borrowing taken from a person, borrowing taken from other parties, that will fall in the category of financial instrument itself. Lease liability, mandatory redeemable instrument, right? This is one of the classic example, mandatory redeemable preference shares. If you look at under Indian GAAP, we classify mandatory redeemable preference share as a share capital, right? But under IFRS, under Ind AS, it may highly possible that those mandatory redeemable preference share will be classified as a financial liability. Because what is financial liability? The contractual obligation to pay cash, the contractual obligation to pay bank is a financial liability, right? So this is the classic example of substance over form as well. What we were doing under Indian GAAP, that is a form, that is a legal form accounting. right? What I'm doing today, under Ind AS, what I'm doing today under IFRS, that is a substance. What is substance? Substance is reality. What is reality? That I need to repay the amount of 10 lakh rupees which I have received at the time of issuance of mandatory redeemable preference shares, right? So financial liability. So we need to be very clear when the liability, whether particular transaction needs to be recognized as a share capital, when a particular transaction needs to be recognized as a liability under IFRS or under Ind AS, guys. And then we need to evaluate at what categories those item needs to be recognized, whether it will be amortized cost or under any other more category. So if I talk about the classification of financial liability, there are only two classification. One is the amortized cost. Second one is the FVTPL. Amortized cost is nothing but a default category. That means if there is any transaction from the liability side, it is always amortized cost, except some, for example, held for trading, for example, derivatives, right? So in case of derivatives and held for trading, we will recognize it at FVTPL category, right? So this is about the primary instrument. How do we take care of those primary instrument in the financial statement, guys, right? Then we have the compound financial instrument, right? Now the question arises, sir, what is compound financial instrument? If we are clear with the financial instrument definition, guys, that means there must be a contract, there must be two or more parties, and there must be a monetary value. Then compound instrument is nothing. The dictionary meaning of compound is a mixture of two or more element, right? If we, this is a science word, guys, compound. If we look at the dictionary, the compound meaning is mixture of two or more element, right? So now when we club it, the compound with the financial instrument, what does it mean from the accounting aspect? It means for a one party, it is a financial asset, and for another party, it is a financial liability as well as equity. That kind of instrument, we will say it is a compound financial instrument, right? What is compound? For another party, it is a liability as well as equity, is called compound financial instrument, right? So first of all, we should be very clear as an accountant, as a chartered accountant, as an auditor, that when we classify a particular instrument as a compound financial instrument, or when we classify a particular instrument as a equity instrument or a primary instrument, right? What could be the example of convertible instrument or a compound financial instrument? It is generally in the nature of convertible instrument with a mandatory payment. For example, 10% bonds of rupees 10 lakh, right? 10% convertible bond of rupees 10 lakh, where interest has to be paid mandatorily, but the bonds will be converted after 10 years down the line. That means one portion is a liability, which is interest. Another portion is a convertible into equity. Let's say 1:1 ratio, which is equity in nature. So in this particular transaction, the one portion is related to the equity and another portion related to the liability, and therefore we will say it is a compound financial instrument, right? We have seen lots of instrument, for example, optionally convertible preference shares, optionally redeemable and convertible preference shares, optionally convertible debenture, compulsory convertible debenture with the mandatory payment, right? So there can be the n number of permutation and combination in respect of compound financial instrument, right? And if there is a compound financial instrument, guys, we need to ensure that the management, that the client is doing the correct accounting, that we need to do the split accounting as per Ind AS 32, as per IAS 32. What is split accounting? That we need to divide the entire instrument. If let's say the company has issued 10% convertible bond of rupees 10 lakh, that means we need to divide this 10 lakh rupees into two portions. One portion will be recognized as equity, another portion is recognized as liability, right? So it may result into some sort of more complexity when we evaluate a particular financial instrument, guys. So as an auditor, we should be very clear that what are the key nuances which is mentioned in a particular contract, right? Then we have the putable financial instrument and the guarantee contracts, guys. Putable financial instrument. What is putable? If I break these words, put, table, and financial instrument, right? What is put? Put means to sell. In the current environment, what is happening? Lots of companies, lots of technology companies are going for an IPO, right? There is a tsunami of IPO in this current year, right? So what is happening? Every startup is going for an IPO, and in every startup there must be a P investor which is sitting at the back end of this startup companies. Now, when they invest, let's say there is a startup which gets set up in 2015. Now they are going for an IPO this year, for example, right? So when the investor must have invested into that startup, right? They must have mentioned that if I'm investing 100 crore rupees in this company, how will I do the exit after 10 years? How will I exit after 5 years? They must have mentioned that in the IPO journey, I will get the benefit and I will exit. But if the IPO doesn't come, then company has to pay 25% IRR to the investor. That means company will buy back those shares. If that kind of clauses are mentioned in the contract, even the equity instrument will become a liability instrument, guys. And it is not a case that we will continue with the equity share capital from Indian GAAP to Ind AS. We need to transfer that equity share capital. We need to reclassify that equity share capital to a liability under IFRS or under Ind AS. So it's very, very important, guys, very, very important as an auditor, as a chartered accountant, that we understand the nuances of different instrument which the company is entering into, right? Actually, what is happening, all these contracts have been prepared and finalized by the management along with their lawyers, right? And the concept of Ind AS has come up just 5 years ago or 6 years ago, right? The nuances which is actually coming up is impacting the company's IPO perspective. If the company is going in an IPO, there are certain guidance which needs to be complied from the SEBI perspective, that this is the net worth in the last preceding 3 years, right? If the company is not complying those guidance, company has to go to the QIB route, right? So it is very, very important, guys. In the SEBI, we need to provide 3 years restated financial statement. Auditor need to sign off. It's a huge responsibility from the perspective of the public who is going to invest. So it is very much important from our perspective as a chartered accountant, as a responsible chartered accountant, as a responsible auditor, that we understand what is the transaction, what is the nature of the transaction, what is the correct accounting treatment, and what is the estimates, judgments made by the management while doing the accounting of that particular instrument. Correct. So this is what the putable financial instrument. Let me provide some more insights on the guidance contract. Let's say there is a holding and subsidiary company. Subsidiary company has taken 100 crore rupees loan from the bank, and the holding company has provided some sort of guarantee that if the subsidiary company fails to repay the loan, then the entire loss to the bank will be made good by the holding company. This is a financial guarantee contract. That means a financial guarantee has been given by holding company to the bank on the behalf of subsidiary company. Under Indian GAAP, we used to recognize this guarantee contracts only as a part of the disclosure. Now we are supposed to recognize the provision for the guarantee, provision for the financial guarantee in the books of the holding company, right? And we need to ensure that provision needs to be recognized at a fair value, right? And it may possible there is no separate contract of that guarantee. It is embedded. One line has been embedded in the contract entered by the bank with the subsidiary company, in which holding company's respective member or the concerned person has just signed it, right? So it is very important from the auditor's perspective that we should be very vigilant, right? We are not only concerned with the only transaction which is appearing in the holding company. It may possible that there is certain transaction which is coming in the related party, right? Which we have not audited because an accounting entry has not been passed by the respective accountant in the company, right? It may be a huge miss from the auditing perspective, guys. So we should be very clear what is the contract, nature, estimates, judgment, disclosures, all those stuff. The third category is derivative and hedge instrument, right? It is the another complex area of hedge accounting. It is another complex area of derivative accounting within the financial instrument, guys, right? It may possible that derivative have been embedded into the particular contract. What is a derivative? For example, cap, floor, forward contracts, option contracts, interest rate swap, cross currency swap, right? So these are the different varieties of the derivatives. All these derivatives under IFRS needs to be accounted as per Ind AS 109, as per IFRS 9, and the accounting will be very clear, fair value through P&L. If I talk about Indian GAAP accounting, the accounting was divided into the multiple areas, right? Initially under Indian GAAP, we were having AS 30, 31, 32, which has been withdrawn by ICAI in December 2016, right? Now, as of present, we have two guidance which is available under Indian GAAP in respect of derivative accounting. One is AS 11, which provides only guidance on the forward covered in the nature of foreign currency. And the second guidance issued by ICAI in the form of guidance note on derivative as on, and which is applicable from 1st April 2016, right? But the guidance under IFRS, guidance under Ind AS is very clear, very simple, that we need to do fair value through P&L. And how to get the fair valuation? We may need to involve the experts. We may need to involve the valuation experts. We may need to involve the valuation from the bank side as well. That if today this item needs to be mark to market, then what is the gain which the company has to company will get, and what is the loss which the company will incur if the company do the mark to market as on the year end, as in the quarter end, right? Hedge accounting, there are different nuances within the hedge accounting, guys. So we should be very clear whether the company is doing a derivative accounting or the company is doing the hedge accounting. And the last one is equity, right? One is financial asset, second one is liability, third one is derivative hedging, and the fourth one is equity, right? Equity means what will go in my share capital in the financial statement. It may possible that Indian GAAP equity will continue as equity, but it may also possible Indian GAAP equity will become a liability under IFRS, liability under Ind AS, right? So this particular slide, guys, I've tried to summarize lots of instruments, lots of nuances, and their accounting treatment, right? So as a summary, we as an auditor, we as a chartered accountant should be very clear in respect of the instrument which the company is entering into, why they are entering into, what is the rationale behind of entering into the transaction, what is the key judgments behind that, key estimates behind that, whether the accounting has been done correctly by the management or not, whether the estimation has been correctly computed, correctly considered by the management or not, right? So lots of things needs to be done from the auditor perspective while doing the audit of the financial instrument, guys, right? Let me move forward and let me provide you a couple of more insights in respect of which what are the different types of the risk which the company is exposed in respect of the complex financial instrument, right? First is the market risk. What is market risk? If let's say the company has invested into the equity shares, right? And the value of equity shares is going up and the value of equity shares is going down because of change in the fluctuation in the price of equity shares, right? It will impact the balance sheet item. It will impact the P&L. The P&L of the company will get volatile, right? Which may ended up into the losses or which may ended up into the gains as well. So as an auditor, we should ensure that all those type of the risk will be identified by the management and will be properly disclosed in the financial statement. What are the various other types of market risk? Equity risk, investment in equity risk, for example, price risk, for example, interest rate risk, for example, commodity price risk, for example, currency risk, right? So management, it is only a responsibility of management first that they will prepare the financial statement. It is only the responsibility of the management first that they will identify all those process, all those risks, and they need to disclose in the financial statement. But as an auditor, it is not about checking the numbers. It also about our knowledge and understanding. We should have a better knowledge as compared to the management, that we know all those things so that we can appropriately check all these numbers which is disclosed by the management in the financial statement, guys, right? Another risk could be credit risk. If the credit risk means if the debtor has to make the payment to me, to my company, but the debtor fails on the due date. So that is another risk which I'm having by entering into the sale and debtor transaction, sale and purchase transaction, right? So debtor profile, debtor aging, I am supposed to disclose in the financial statement. Provision for expected loss, provision for the expected credit loss, which is a new concept which has come up under Ind AS 109, that needs to be disclosed properly as per the requirement of Schedule 3, as per the requirement of Ind AS 109 appropriately, right? Liquidity risk. What is liquidity risk? If I need to make a payment of 1,000 crores to my creditor over a period, right? So I am also having a risk. If I will become a bankrupt tomorrow, if the company will become a bankrupt tomorrow, that is the risk I'm having in my books of accounts, right? In the COVID period, we have seen lots of companies have faced lots of challenges in receiving the money, in making the payment of money, right? So as per Ind AS 109, another risk has come up, which is a liquidity risk. And in order to cater this risk, management is supposed to disclose the maturity profile of the company, that at what point in time the management is supposed to make the payment to the other party, right? That means management is supposed to give maturity profile. That means management is supposed to give the aging profile of the creditor in the financial statement. And very recently, Schedule 3 has got amended. MCA has made an amendment that we need to give the credit aging in the financial statement, which was never there prior to that. And it was made mandatorily applicable from 1st April 2021. That means when a company will prepare its financial statement for March 2022, they are supposed to give the creditor aging for the current year, but also they are also supposed to give the creditor aging of the previous year as well, right? So it may possible that 31st March 2021 numbers company need to disclose separately in terms of creditor aging and debtor aging. Right, guys? Let me move forward. And what are the other risks? Operational risk. What can be the operational risk? Limited understanding of the transaction and accounting. It may possible that the client's management, client's employee are having a very limited understanding on the financial instrument, right? So in that case, it will increase the inherent risk for the auditor. They may have an inappropriate documentation of the complex transaction, like derivative transaction, hedge accounting, currency swap, for example, optionally redeemable preference shares, mandatory redeemable preference shares. Then in such kind of scenarios, the role of an auditor will significantly increase. The chances of material misstatement will significantly increase, right? Insufficient monitoring of the financial instrument transaction, the role of the auditor will increase, right? So these are the guys different risk which the company is exposed to. And I would say auditor is also exposed to, because the company is exposed to these risks, and the role of the auditor keeps on increasing. The auditor needs to be very vigilant when we are talking about the financial instrument, when we are talking about the audit of those financial instruments. Right, guys? Let me move on and let me provide you a couple of more insights in respect of the key consideration, what we should consider while doing the audit of the financial statement. Only from the perspective of financial instrument. Okay. First is purpose of using the complex financial instrument, right? So as an auditor, we should make an inquiries with the management first of all. What is the reason of entering into this complex financial instrument, right? If let's say the holding company has given an interest-free loan to the subsidiary, the auditor should inquire from the management of subsidiary. The auditor should inquire the management of the holding company, what is the reason of giving the interest free? This is not at the market terms, because if the company has to take a loan from bank, it will generally come at 10%, 12%, right? But you are giving free. What is the reason of that? Whether the subsidiary is running into the significant losses, whether the subsidiary is exposed to the going concern, what is the rationale? What is the reason of giving an interest-free loan to the subsidiary company? So these kind of inquiries, these kind of questions we should pose to the management when we see any kind of financial instrument, guys. When we see a complex financial instrument which is not in the routine nature. What is routine nature? Trade receivable, trade payable, cash, bank. These are routine nature transactions. But when I talk about the complex means interest-free loan, optionally convertible preference shares, redeemable preference shares, those kind of things, right? So we need to perform an inquiry with the management. Second is we need to obtain those documents. We need to understand the terms and condition, what is written in those documents. It may possible that management will tell you the entire story, but it may possible they have missed a couple of important aspects, because it may possible management people have not read the entire terms and condition in detail. It may possible that the management employees are not aware of the complexities of those particular clauses, which may impact the accounting treatment in the financial statement, right? So as an accountant, as a chartered accountant, as an auditor of the company, we should have a good understanding of the financial instrument. We should go through those documents. We should understand what are the exact terms and condition, what are the complex clauses which are mentioned into those contracts, right? Another area, use of expert. It may possible, right? The accounting is an ocean, factually speaking. After the introduction of the Ind AS and IFRS, right? Accounting becomes a ocean kind of thing. It may possible that every person does not know everything, right? It may possible that every person does not know anything, right? That is why we have a concept of using the help of expert. That is why the auditing standard introduced the concept of experts, right? So for example, if the company has entered into a derivative transaction, right, we may we may don't know that how to recognize the derivative at fair value, right? We only know the accounting treatment, but how to compute the fair value, we may don't know, right? So in that particular kind of scenario, we need to reach out to the experts, to the valuation experts, that please do the accounting in this particular aspect, right? It may possible that the company has gone to the third party expert and company has get the fair valuation done, but auditor need to apply its own judgment whether the inputs, whether the estimation, whether the judgments made by the expert are correct or not, are reasonable or not, right? It may possible if the auditor is of the view that these estimates, these judgment, these inputs are doesn't seems to be appropriate, the auditor is totally open to involve another expert and get his independent opinion, right? So we should consider the impact, we should consider the use of the expert while doing the financial instrument, guys, right? Let me move forward. Valuation methodology, very important. As per the guidance given under IFRS or Ind AS 113, there are three approaches. One is the market approach, cost approach, income approach to do the fair valuation of any particular transaction, right? I agree. This standard provides a very limited guidance on the fair valuation, but it provides some sort of understanding that what are the key aspects should be considered, what are the methodology while doing the accounting, while doing the fair valuation of a particular transaction. So 113 provides couple of approaches. One is the market approach, one is the cost approach, one is the income approach. Market approach means if I'm doing the valuation of a listed shares of a list, if I'm doing the valuation of an investment in shares of a listed company, right? So then I will get the market price. If I am doing the valuation of a PPE, then I should go for the cost approach, which is the replacement approach. But if I'm doing the valuation of a business, it may possible that I need to adopt income approach. What is income approach? It is a discounted cash flow technique. That means I need to plot the cash flows. I need to estimate the cash flows first. I need to plot the cash flows in an Excel file, apply a discount rate and do the discounting. That is called income approach. That is called discounted cash flow technique, right? So auditor needs to evaluate whether the valuation technique used by the management or the valuation technique used by the expert hired by the management, whether those valuation techniques seems to be appropriate, whether those valuation techniques seems to be correct, whether the inputs used are correct or not, right? So that is in respect of the valuation technique. So auditor needs to be very vigilant. Auditor should apply its professional skepticism while doing the audit of these areas. Correct, guys? Okay. Inputs to the valuation model. I have talked about this, right? So while doing the audit of the particular area in the financial instrument, we need to evaluate the inputs used for the valuation, used for the purpose of computation by the management, right? And the estimates and judgments which the management has used. The auditor should know, the auditor should be aware of this fact that those have been properly disclosed in the financial statement. Auditor should ensure that those disclosure has been made as per the respective standard, right? Okay, offsetting. This is one of the very critical area, offsetting. Now the question arises, can we offset the financial asset with a financial liability? No. Can we offset the asset with the liabilities? No. Otherwise, we will have only share capital and reserve and surplus. Can we offset expense versus revenue? No. But there are certain items which are supposed to be netted off. For example, if I talk about certain items, deferred tax. Deferred tax asset can be netted off with the deferred tax liability. Only if the company is having a legal right to set it off, only if it pertains to one particular authority, right? Provision for doubtful debt can be netted off from the debtors. Provision for inventory obsolescence can be netted off from the inventory. So there are certain items, certain assets and liabilities which can be netted off. Similarly, under financial instrument standard, there are certain scenarios where the company can net off financial asset with the financial liability, where the company has a legal enforceable right to set off. where the company has an intention to set up the financial asset and a liability on a net basis. So I give you a classic example very recently I've dealt with. There's a company who has taken a loan from bank, and that loan has been passed off to the subsidiary of that company, right? And the main company or a holding company is supposed to pay only when the subsidiary company will pay back to the holding company, right? And subsidiary company will pay the interest. Subsidiary company will utilize that amount of loan which has been passed through from the holding company, right? In that case, we can evaluate as per the documentation, we can evaluate as per the contract entered between the holding subsidiary and bank, that who has to recognize actual liability, whether the holding company is supposed to recognize the liability, whether the subsidiary company is supposed to recognize the liability, right? So in that particular scenario, holding company may offset financial asset with a financial liability. Now there is a big risk of the material misstatement from the auditor perspective, from the company perspective. If the company has not done the offsetting, then it may result to the inflation of the assets and liability. And if the company has done incorrectly netting off, then it may result to the undervaluation or deflation of the assets and liabilities. So the auditor needs to apply their due judgments, professional skepticism, while doing such kind of evaluation, whether the holding company is operating as an agent or whether the holding company is operating as a principal. Therefore, they need to reach out to the conclusion it's a gross accounting or it's a net accounting, right? And this evaluation, first of all, needs to be done by management. There is no doubt management is only responsible for doing the evaluation, for preparation of the financial statement, and auditor has to revisit those numbers, revisit or recheck those evaluation from their perspective. But the auditor needs to be very vigilant in the today's world that all those things are doing by the management are as per the compliance of the respective standard or not, right? So this is in respect of offsetting of financial asset with the financial liability. Another area which is a consistency. Now in respect of the valuation, it may possible that the company has used the market approach last year, but the company is changing the approach from market approach to income approach or market approach to the cost approach in the current year, right? So auditor should raise the question whether the valuation done by the valuer for the previous year was correct or not correct. Why the company is changing the method in the current year which was not adopted in the previous year? So those kind of question the auditor should think of. The auditor should pose off those questions on the other side of the management, guys, right? What else? CVOP. What is CVOP? It's an assertion. It's an audit assertion. C stands for completeness, E stands for existence, A stands for the accuracy and valuation, O stands for the obligation, P stands for the presentation. So while doing the audit of the financial instrument, guys, and even entire financial instrument, we need to have something in my mind that whether I have obtained all the documents to ensure the completeness, whether I have obtained all the document to ensure the existence, whether I have done significant research, whether I have done appropriate work in order to ensure the accuracy and the valuation, whether there any obligation in the financial statement which has not been disclosed by the management, whether the disclosure has been made appropriately by the management as per the respective standards. So these are the different nuances, guys. Again, we need to ensure the professional skepticism as well. What is professional skepticism? Sufficient appropriate auditors have been obtained or not. Management judgment, estimation, valuation, effectiveness on the internal control. We will also talk about the internal control, right? And very importantly, information system. Who is reviewing the information system? What is the hierarchy level of reviewing the information system in the organization? Who is taking the decision in the organization, whether a lower level employee who is only an accountant, who is only a graduate, whether he is taking a decision based on his judgment or whether the senior management is involved in taking the decision, whether the appropriate reviews has been taken by the management or not, right? These all are the professional captains. These all also fall into the internal control environment, guys. So our next topic on next point is audit consideration in the evaluation of internal control. So in the internal control, guys, we need to evaluate whether the internal control of the company is adequate or not, right? So for example, what we need to evaluate, for example, evaluate the control environment. In this, we need to check whether the management is involved in taking the decision or not, right? Whether the director, CFO, risk management head, whether these people are involved in taking the decision, whether they want to invest in the financial instrument or not. And if the financial instrument has been invested, if the investment has already been made, what is the appropriate documentation for that? Right? We need to ensure as an auditor, as an accountant, that organization policy exists or not while doing the such kind of investment. It may possible that for a PSU segment, they have debarred any kind of investment in a financial instrument because of the volatile market, because of the volatile risk, right? And the company is entering into the similar kind of transaction into the capital market, right? This results into a big contradiction. This results into a big contravention of the company's policy. So as an auditor, we should evaluate these kind of scenarios. We should pose these kind of questions to the management. Evaluate risk assessment process, right? So whenever a company is investing into such, or whenever the company is entering into such kind of financial instrument, complex financial instrument, there must be a proper study needs to be done before that investment, right? There must be a risk management team who has evaluated all these pros and cons of those investment, right? From the tax aspect, from the management aspect, from the financial reporting aspect. And as an auditor, we should obtain those documents, we should obtain those manuals, we should obtain those process, we should obtain those framework, and evaluate whether the appropriate documentation has been made by the management or not, as per the risk assessment process mentioned in those manuals. Correct? What else? We have evaluation of existence of appropriate information system. This I've already talked about, whether the information system is so comprehensive enough, is so robust enough that a particular item needs to be evaluated or reviewed by the at a next level, at a next level in the hierarchy, right? Whether, let's say, if the company, if the lower management, or if the executive of the company has taken a discount rate of 10%, who is reviewing that whether the discount rate considered by the executive is correct or not, right? Whether it should be 8%, it should be 10%, it should be 12%, right? Who is reviewing? Who is the authority to decide from the management aspect, right? What is the judgment used, and who is reviewing those judgments, right? So the auditor needs to evaluate all these aspects. Then we have the review and evaluation of the design and implementing system of the internal control. So whatever the control management has designed in order to ensure the financial instrument, all those design needs to be evaluated by the auditor. All those controls needs to be checked by the auditor. Auditor should perform the test of control in that particular scenario. And then we have the reliability of the financial accounting and reporting system, right? How reliable the company is in respect of financial reporting. While doing the audit, whether the lots of adjustments are coming into the picture which has not been recognized by the management, right? That past scenario, the previous understanding, the past experience we are having for the particular company, that will tell us about, that will throw the light on us that the financial reporting system is strong or financial reporting system is not so strong, right? So that means from the financial instrument audit perspective, it's very important that we focus on the internal control environment, we focus on the key aspect in the audit of those instruments, and we focus what are the key instrument which the company has entered into, right, guys? Then I have included couple of case studies. Let me provide you couple of practical example how those evaluation needs to be taken care of. Right? For example, an interest-free loan has been given by the holding company to a subsidiary company, right? So let's say H Limited has provided interest-free loan to subsidiary company of rupees 1 lakh for 5 years, and the market rate is 10%. So what should be the day one accounting in the books of holding company? What should be the day one accounting in the books of subsidiary company, right? Now, let's say the management has passed this accounting entry, loan has actually been given at 1 lakh rupees, but the management has recognized that loan at 62,000 rupees. On the subsidiary side, management has received 1 lakh rupees, but the liability they have recognized 62,000, right? And the differential, which is 37,000 rupees, they have recognized as a deemed investment, and in the books of subsidiary, they have recognized as a capital contribution, right? So as an auditor, first of all, we should be very clear that what is the accounting treatment under IFRS, under Ind AS, if an interest-free loan has been given by the holding company to a subsidiary company, right? Under Indian GAAP, we just normally recognize bank account debit to liability. We just recognize in the books of holding company loan to subsidiary to bank, right? But Ind AS 109 says that the interest-free loan has been given. That means holding company has passed on some sort of benefit to the subsidiary company. That means I will recognize my financial instrument in the form of loan at fair value, and differential will be accounted as deemed investment. In this case, the amount is coming to 37,000. And in this case, the amount is coming to 37,000 as a capital contribution, right? So what is the audit consideration in this case? Let's say this is the transaction which has been entered by the management, and these are the accounting which is done by the holding company and subsidiary company. Now, as an auditor, what we should do? First of all, we should understand the rationale of providing interest-free loan. Why the holding company has provided interest-free loan to subsidiary, whether subsidiary is incurring significant losses, whether the company is going into the going concern issue, what is the reason of providing interest-free loan, right? Then we need to understand the terms, condition, and covenants of loan. We need to understand the evaluation methodology as per Ind AS 113. We need to understand the discounting rate considered by the holding and subsidiary. It may possible the discounting rate for holding is different. It may possible the discounting rate in the books of subsidiary is different. So we need to understand that nuances. We need to evaluate the estimates and judgments involved. For example, management will evaluate, management will plot that we will make a payment on a over the period. We are also evaluating, or the management should also evaluate whether they are making a prepayment or not, right? So auditor needs to evaluate those estimates and judgments. Evaluation of the financial assets and liability classification, whether it will be FVTPL, FVTOCI, amortized cost. What will be the impact of these accounting entries in the console, whether this will get knocked off in the console books or not. What is the impact of deferred tax in the holding books? What is the impact of deferred tax in the subsidiary books, right? Evaluation of notional gain and loss in the holding and subsidiary, because subsequently what will happen, holding company will recognize a notional income on this loan, and subsidiary company will recognize a notional expense on this 60,000 rupees, right? So that it will come back to 1 lakh rupees after the expiry of 5 years. So what will happen, whether this expense will be allowed as deduction under tax, whether that income is chargeable under tax, right? So those evaluation needs to be done, but answer is pretty much clear. ICAI has issued already a guidance on that. These notional gains, these notional expenses are not subject to tax, right? How to present the deemed investment in the books of holding company, how to present a capital contribution in the books of subsidiary company, whether the appropriate disclosure has been made by the management as per Ind AS 107 or not. So these are the key nuances. These are the key audit considerations which we can think of from or while doing the audit of those complex financial instrument, guys. Right? Let me take one more case study, guys. This is in respect of compound financial instrument. What is compound? I explained initially that when a particular transaction is in the nature of equity, when a particular transaction is in the nature of liability for one party, then it is called a compound financial instrument, right? So in this case, it's a case of optionally redeemable convertible bond, right? J Limited issued 2,000 convertible bond at 1,000 per bond with a 3 years term. Interest is payable annually, 6%. So that means there is a bond which is convertible into equity, and there is a mandatory payment of interest 6%. The company has incurred issue cost of rupees 1 lakh. What is issue cost? It's a transaction cost. Each bond is convertible at the holder's option at any time into 250 ordinary share. That means 1:250 ratio is also given in the scenario. At the time of the issue, market rate for similar debt without conversion option is 9%, right? So market discount rate is also given in the question. What will be the accounting treatment in the issuer books, right? So it is a classic case of the compound financial instrument where the principal portion will get converted into equity and the interest portion is supposed to be repaid to the holder, right? Company has incurred a transaction cost as well, right? Company has a discounting rate at the rate of 9%. What should be the accounting, right? So as an auditor, we should be aware of the fact whether in this particular scenario, which standard is applicable, whether 109 is applicable, whether 32 is applicable or which other any standard is applicable in this particular scenario, right? So for your understanding, in this particular scenario, Ind AS 32 is applicable, right, guys? So Ind AS 32 is very clear that we need to do a split accounting. One portion will be recognized as a liability, another portion will be recognized as equity, and whatever the transaction cost the company has incurred, that will be netted off from the liability as well as equity, right? So what is the audit consideration in this case, right? First of all, we need to understand what is the rationale again, what are the key terms and conditions of the contracts, valuation methodology, what are the valuation methodology considered by the management in doing the split accounting, right? What are the estimates involved, judgment involved, discount rate involved, what is the whether the company has taken the FVTPL route for the liability or not, amortized cost of the liability or not, right? What is the transaction, what is the treatment of this liability subsequently, because the company will recognize notional expense, whether that notional expense is chargeable to is deductible under tax or not, what is the impact of deferred tax under books in respect of those expenses, whether on day one I am supposed to recognize deferred tax or not. So these are the various nuances, various consideration which the auditor should think of while doing the audit of complex financial instrument, guys, right? And a couple of more topics I have included, right? For example, moratorium period, because in the last year we have seen that the government has provided some sort of exemption in the repayment, right? Whether it should be treated as a default, answer is no. ICS provides certain guidance on that. How the moratorium it should be accounted, it may be treated as a modification if the terms are substantial in nature. If the modification may not be treated as a modification if the terms are not substantial, right? Classification, whether the classification of borrowing in the financial statement like COVID impacted the long-term loan, whether the long-term loan needs to be recognized as a short-term loan or not, right? It depends. If it is a minor breach, then company may continue with the long-term loan with the appropriate disclosure. If it is a major breach, then the company may classify from the long-term loan to a short-term loan. And again, it will impact lots of things in the financial statement. So the auditor should be aware of, auditor should be vigilant that when it will be transferred as a short-term loan, when it will be continue as a long-term loan in the financial statement. Expected credit loss significantly impacted in most of the companies, right? So company needs to, it may possible the company needs to reevaluate that how to create the provision for doubtful debts. It may possible that the inputs used earlier will go change, right? So expected credit loss is one of the important areas which get impacted. Estimates and judgment, very, very important from the financial instrument perspective, otherwise from the financial statement perspective as well, right? Input methodology, discounting rate, valuation methodology, sensitivity analysis, all those are the part of the estimates, right? Estimates needs to be evaluated on every reporting date. If it's a quarterly reporting, auditor is supposed to review whether the management has a proper review process of the estimates review or not. All these estimates and judgment needs to be disclosed. Auditor need to ensure that all the estimates and judgment have been appropriately disclosed by the management in the financial statement, guys, right? And lastly, guys, I have a FRRB comments. FRRB stands for Financial Reporting Review Board. It is a cell of ICI. They have issued, they keeps on reviewing the financial statement of various companies under Indian GAAP, under IFRS, and they keep on issuing their comments that these are the different errors committed by different companies without taking their name, so that in the market as a chartered accountant, we come to know these are the errors and we can rectify those errors in our next subsequent reporting, right? Okay, what are the key errors? Incorrect presentation of fair valuation gain on investment classified as FVTPL. So it may possible that one company has shown the fair valuation gain as a other income, but there is a guidance note issued by the ICI in the past that the fair valuation gain on investment will be shown as a part of other non-operating income. So in this case, FRRB said that this is a non-compliance of the guidance note issued by ICI on Schedule 3. Another area is incorrect accounting of the forward contract. It may possible the company has not done the correct accounting of the forward contract. So FRRB said that the company should have adopted the hedge accounting principles or a derivative accounting principle under Ind AS 109. So this has actually resulted into the incorrect accounting policy adopted by the company. Another, it's a case of incorrect accounting policy on the forex classification. They have clearly said that it results into an incorrect accounting policy on the forex disposal of the foreign operation. Because if the foreign operation get disposed, the forex lying in the OCI will get transferred to P&L. So there is an inconsistency, incorrect policy which they have mentioned in the accounting policy. Right. So again, this is a non-compliance of Ind AS 109. Then we have the last comment from FRRB on financial instrument is incorrect presentation of foreign exchange loss. Right. The guidance is very clear. If there is a foreign exchange loss, it will be recognized as an expense. If there is a foreign exchange gain, it will be recognized as other income in the revenue side. But in this case, the company what has done, they have deducted the foreign exchange loss from the revenue itself. That means they have reduced their top line. This results into an incorrect presentation and the non-compliance of ICAI guidance 2. So this is what, guys, I have in respect of financial instrument key nuances, key challenges which we guys should understand and respect, and we should think of from that perspective that what are the key pointers, what are the key nuances we should consider in our mind while doing the audit of financial instrument. Thank you so much, guys. Anilji, this is from my side.
Thank you so much, sir. Amitji, thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yeah, absolutely.
Sir,
I can hear you.
It was really wonderful deliberation. We have gained a lot through your deliberation on various intricacies on financial instruments. We have gained a lot. Hope our members have also gained a lot. But due to the technical glitch, some issue in this portal, so we haven't received any question from the member. But
Okay.
surely we will receive the questions through. We will try to grab the questions. Then I will mail you if I receive the questions from the members. Then we accordingly we will revert to the members. But
Sure,
it was
sir, sure.
a wonderful experience to have with you on today's VCM. It was really wonderful deliberation. Thanks a lot on behalf of CNB of ICAI as well as the Jalandhar branch. I extend my heartiest thanks towards you also.
Thank you,
so
sir.
much,
Thank you.
Anilji,
Thank
for
you,
sparing
sir.
your
Thank you,
valuable
Shashi
time.
Bhushan ji.
And I
Thank you,
also
Sonia
thanks
ma'am.
Jalandhar branch for hosting this mega VCM. Thank you, Vice Chairman Sir Shashi Bhushan ji, for sparing your valuable time, and Madam Sonia ji in her absentia. Due to the technical glitch again, she could not. She is trying to join, but किसी कारण से वो नहीं join कर पा रही है दोबारा. So in her absentia, thanks to Sonia Madam, Honorable Chairperson of Jalandhar branch, for sparing her valuable time and hosting this mega VCM. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank
Good
you, sir.
evening.
Thank you for your
Namaste.
support. Thank you.
Namaste. Namaste.
Okay, sir.
Good evening.
Namaste.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you,
Thanks to all
Shashi
the
ji.
audience for joining. Thank you so much.
Thank you.